Implementing a massive diversity push in the form of a one-off event is stopping you from becoming inclusive. I'm Dr. Jonathan Ashong Lamptey. I work with organizations to make them inclusive, and I'm on a mission to help 1 million people like you to make your workplace inclusive. Get your pen and paper ready, because I'm going to give you 3 reasons why relying on a one-off diversity intervention is a huge mistake that can take you away from becoming inclusive. A quick point I want to make just before we get into the show. You may have noticed I've been experimenting with different mics. I don't know which one you think is best. Give me some feedback. That would be really helpful to make sure that the sound quality of the shows is in line with what you expect. Okay, let's get back to the show. This is the final episode in a series of shows about the 7 biggest mistakes that organizations make on their inclusion journey. 7 predictable errors that I consistently find in organizations. There's every chance that you're making this mistake and it's compromising your inclusion efforts. Make sure you check out the other shows in the series because it could make all the difference to your success. A one-off diversity-related intervention is a typical go-to response for companies that experience an incident related to diversity and inclusion. Remember when 2 black men were arrested at Starbucks for trespassing because they refused to buy coffee or leave the store? Thousands of people use Starbucks to meet friends. We've all done it, to work, to study. Personally, I always buy a drink if I'm going to be in a place like that for a while, but it's not hard for us to understand that some people don't. For these men in particular, they were arrested. There was a public outcry and the company recognized that this wasn't appropriate behavior. And later, they closed all of their stores to provide racial bias training for their entire staff. Now, I'm not talking about Starbucks specifically, but when situations like this occur, the intervention often looks like a knee-jerk reaction. It's a signal to the marketplace that they've got this under control. The problem here is twofold. If inclusion was so important to the organization, why is an elaborate response required? The other issue is related to the diversity promise of the organization. I talk about diversity promises in another show. But in short, leaders are well versed in promoting the importance of diversity and inclusion to their organization. But it's the employees who get to see the truth. They get to see if the words and actions match up. They're the ones that you really need to buy into the narrative. And they'll only do that if what's important is addressed all the time. Failing to engage employees in this way is one of the 3 biggest problems that organizations experience on their inclusion journey, which is failing to engage the people that you want to include. Regular listeners hear me talk about this a lot, and it may sound as if I'm always talking about people from minority groups. And often I am. But in an inclusive organization, you're going to need to engage everyone. And that's what I'm talking about here. The second point I want to make is that one-off interventions aren't effective. You know me, I love an evidence-based approach. And I came across a paper that discussed 40 years of research evaluating diversity training. And it said that a one-off approach isn't effective in giving us the things that we want. And what are the things that we want? You hear me say that we need the 3 Ps: people, potential, and performance. People, as we discussed earlier, is needing to engage the people that you want to include. Potential, you need a culture of inclusion where everyone reaches their potential. And then there's performance. You need to understand a business case for diversity specific to your organization. So you need to understand how this shows up and what this means to your performance. So that's what we need, but how do we get there? Well, part of what we want is to transform as individuals. We need to evolve. We need to change our attitudes. We need to change the way we feel, and we need to change the way that we behave. That's what all this training is supposed to achieve. The issue here is that over 40 years of research show that these one-off interventions, they have a smaller effect on attitudes, a smaller effect on how people feel, and a smaller effect on behavioural learning compared to interventions that are part of a longer program of change. Did you get that? One-off interventions are less effective than programs of change. Ignoring this is harming your efforts to become an inclusive organization. The third and final point I want to make is about the system. One-off interventions don't address the systemic issues that you have in your organization. One-off interventions don't address the systems of disadvantage that you have in your organization. One-off interventions imply that the solution to creating an inclusive workplace is just about the individuals. Yes, it's true, organizations are made up of individuals, but they're also made up of systems. And these systems produce and reproduce outcomes that aren't always obvious to the naked eye unless you've got a critical eye. What do I mean by that? Well, last week I spoke about the BBC and their treatment of Naga Munchetty. Naga Munchetty is a host of the BBC Breakfast Show. She made some remarks about Donald Trump, and a complaint was made about Naga Munchetty and her co-host, Dan Walker, regarding their conversation. Dan Walker initiated and led the conversation that resulted in the complaint, but the BBC pursued a complaint against Naga Munchetty alone. All of this was sorted out at a higher level, an inclusion ex machina. It was all sorted. Now, I'm sure that the people who were involved in this process, they were just following the procedure. I bet on paper, they did nothing wrong. It's not always about individual behavior. It's about the system. And these systems reproduce existing norms. And one-off interventions don't solve that. It's like that old chestnut when you speak to recruiters who say that we can't find any black talent. We can't find any Asian talent. We can't find any, as they say, BAME talent. What they don't realize is that their systems are set up not to find these types of talent. One-off interventions don't solve that. Suppose you wanted to run a marathon. Doing a long run once isn't going to make a difference. It's not going to make you ready to run the London Marathon. Trust me, I know. About 15 years ago, I ran the London Marathon with no training, except running a couple of miles to my friend's house. Needless to say, I felt each and every step of that marathon. It took forever and I was in agony at the end of it, and I couldn't walk properly for over a week. That's an outlandish mistake, which sounds ridiculous, right? Well, some of your organizations are doing something equally outlandish by relying on one-off interventions, thinking that it's going to prepare you for your own inclusion marathon. What you need is a program, little but often. It's a marathon task. Some days training are going to be better than others. Some days you'll skip. Some days training will be worse than others. In any case, you'll make a plan. It won't be perfect, but you won't do it just once and think that it's good enough. You'll be doing it as part of a program of change. So let's wrap this up. What are the key messages here? Apart from the obvious one, don't do the London Marathon without training for it. But what else? Well, relying on a one-off intervention is an inclusion mistake because 1, it's less likely to engage people in a meaningful way. 2, it's not effective compared to programs of change. And 3, it won't change systems of disadvantage. So what do you think? Are you relying on a one-off intervention to make you inclusive? Get in touch or leave a message. I would love to hear from you. If you've learned something from today's show, you should sign up to our insider list on our website. It's free and you can stay ahead of the pack and get the best of everything that I produce. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you in the next episode.